But there's so many koi keepers out there that don't buy a test kit, and I think myself personally, and over the years of me keeping koi, I've also spent hundreds of pounds on all of these fancy panometers as well, and carbon blocks. But what this kit does and why I love it so much, so moving over to my main pond, I've got set up here, I like using the Ntlabs KH buffer. The number one key of it all is what I must stress in this video. First drop's going in. It depends what they do at the water board where you get your water from. I basically just add the same amount every other day. When I get back, my fish are nice and healthy. Just a bit of a routine thing for me. Hello everyone, welcome back. James the Koi Whisperer. So I got a little something different for you in this video because I'm going away this weekend, and I always get comments and questions on my channel about what do I do when I go away for a few days. Well, just because I own a drum filter doesn't mean that I have to do nothing. So preparation before I go away is something that I have to do to make sure that when I get back, my fish are nice and healthy. And the first thing I do is water tests. Because if anyone else is like me and you live in a soft water area, and if people don't know what that means, it means the water out your tap supply is really soft, which means I've got a really low KH. And I have to constantly monitor my KH, because if I didn't, my pH would be unstable and my fish would, well, to be fair, I wouldn't be able to keep koi. Test my KH, test my pH. But over the years of me keeping koi, I've spent hundreds of pounds on all of these fancy bits of equipment. The Blue Lab Guardian, which can keep an eye on your TDS, your temperature, your pH. Inside of the pond I've got a probe. But what I found over the years, I found that it just costs a lot of money and it's not really necessary. It's handy, but it's not necessary. I've also spent hundreds of pounds on all of these fancy manometers as well to make sure that I can get an exact reading of what I'm testing for. Over the years, I'm not going to lie to you, the best test kit that I've found for the quickest and easiest results is the Pond Lab Test Kit 200. It's not a sponsored video at all. I just want to tell you that a kit like this costs around 25 to 30 quid, I believe. And some of this fancy stuff is super expensive. The initial outlay of buying little manometers like this, they are brilliant, but the downside about it, when you need to replace certain things like reagents, whatever they're called, which you need to use these to put into this to get the results, each time you buy them, it costs stupid amounts of money. And I'm not going to lie, one bottle like that retails around 22 quid. You can only do 20 kH test when you're using something like this. And I just found, when I first started into the hobby, I thought it would be essential that something like this would help me in the hobby. One thing I wanted to add about the manometers before I slag them off, because I'm not slagging them off, they're brilliant bits of equipment, but they're unnecessary bits of equipment. The only one that I do recommend, I highly recommend, is the only test kit that I found which is super useful. If you're unsure on the reasons why I believe that one's super useful, because a lot of us use like that, a 3-stage dechlorinator with a big blue. Well, the only way of testing if you've got any chlorine going into your pond is with one of those test meters. You can also use DPD number 4 tablets, which you can purchase off eBay, but it doesn't actually give you a result to tell you how much chlorine you've got going into the system. It will only tell you if there's chlorine in the system. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. But that is, out of all of those test kits you just saw, that's my favourite one, for the main reason is that I can test to see what I'm putting into the pond. A lot of people always ask me, how do you get your water so good, or how do you know what you're doing? And that, the main key is keeping it stable. So as a lot of us koi keepers do, we all either do a trickle in and a trickle out, or some koi keepers do a water change at the end of each week, and then they top up 10 or 20% of clean water. But what a lot of koi keepers don't do is monitor what water they're putting into the pond, whether that be a high chlorine level, chloramine, whether that be a super high KH or a super low KH like myself, whether that be a high pH or a low pH. Whatever comes from your tap water supply is what you're sort of restricted to for when it goes into the pond. It's only when it's in the pond is how you can buffer it or adjust to what you want to run, whether that be some people use an RO system, which, you know, I'm not so keyed up on that. I'm not going to start explaining something that I don't really know all of the technical terms. I've got an idea of how it works, but I'm not going to go there. I'm basically just letting you know that whatever you're putting into your pond is something for the early stages of koi keepers, something to keep an eye on, and it's definitely worth checking. When you do a water test on your main pond, test the water that you're putting into the pond. As you can see, my main water that comes from my house, this runs through into a 3-stage dechlorinator, which these filter pads in here and carbon blocks, they need to be replaced on a regular basis. Well, I've got mine set up so it runs through this, then it runs through a meter to let me know how much water that I've used, then it runs through, this is what you call a big blue, and this is filled with activated carbon, then it runs out through the side, then it returns here, and mine's on a constant trickle which goes into the pond, and it's also on a constant trickle out which goes out of the pond. So being on the platform that I'm at, I get to speak to a hell of a lot of koi keepers, and I'm always really surprised that loads of people in this hobby go and spend loads of money on koi, they spend loads of money on building their pond, but there's so many koi keepers out there that don't buy a test kit. But I think myself personally, a test kit is the most valuable bit of equipment to this whole hobby. It doesn't matter what filtration that you run, it doesn't matter what koi that you have. If you can't test the water, then you're never going to know if you've got a problem or not. You'll never know what your water actually is, and you don't know if that water's, you know, stable or suitable for fish to live in. So I highly recommend getting a test kit. A lot of people new to the hobby are quite put off by it because they're like, oh, I don't really know how to do it. And I can remember about 10 years ago when I first ever had my first test kit, I thought I was some sort of scientist, that I was testing for the water, but it's so simple to do. And I'm just going to run you through real quickly of how I test my KH, how I test my chlorine, and just to give you guys, for the people out there that are new to the hobby, a bit of a little demonstration of the what's, the whens and the wheres, really, to let you know that we don't keep koi, we keep the water. And if you keep the water good, the koi will look after themselves. Right, so opening up the test kit, just to show you, this is a brand new test kit. I'll open it up just to show you. So inside the test kit, what you get is all of your chemicals to let you know what you're actually going to be testing for. It gives you a demonstration guide of how much water that you need to put into each tube. It does come with stickers if you want to put the stickers on the tube to label up what you know what you're testing for, and then after you've done a test you can literally pop that inside of there. So that's your ammonia. What this kit does and why I love it so much, on the back of the box it gives you all of the colour readings of what you've got to look out for, what's toxic to the fish, where your caution levels are, where it's poisonous to the fish, and it lets you know where you should be and what you should be at. Everyone has a different opinion on different stuff. So everyone has a different opinion on what your KH should be, what your GH should be, what your pH should be. But what you've got to do, the main key of it, is if you keep it stable and exactly the same all of the time, koi will live a lot better life. It's what they don't like is the difference. And I'm just going to run you through a real quick test. It also comes with syringe, which it says on there 5 mils. It's simple as what it says, you need 5 mils of water. So because we're doing a KH test, it says on here that we need 5 mils of water. You add 1 drop of the chemical, and then that should change the water to go blue, and then you count the drops to let you know your KH. Well, I personally in this pond, because I suffer with a really low KH out of my tap water supply, I run a tap water supply, which we'll do a test in a minute. My KH out of the tap comes out under 1, which in the pond, ideally, I like keeping it stable at 2. That being said, I know it's a bit of yibbity yabbada, but this is how easy you test. So you just literally put your 5 mils of water straight into your test tube. Then what you do, you use your KH chemical, you put 1 drop into the top of the bottle. I personally recommend if you put the bottle dead upright, you get a nice even drop going into the bottle. You give it a bit of a shake. That turns the water blue. As you can see, I'll just put it against a bit of white. And then what you do, you count your drops from now, and it will give you a reading of how much KH is in the pond. So ideally, I'm looking for 2 drops. So 1 drop, and it's turned blue. 2 drops, and we're turning yellow. So that tells me that I've got to do no buffering to this pond today. It is completely where it needs to be, and I don't have to add any chemical to this pond. But I'll show you what I would do if I did need to add a chemical, because this pond's fine, but I need to do a test on this pond now as well. Right, so moving over to my main pond, I'll just do a quick test on this pond as well, because this is something as a koi keeper that I've learnt over the years. Because I suffer with a low KH going into the pond, this is the main thing that I have to test for, because my KH coming out of my tap water is only 1. I need to make sure that I maintain the same KH in this pond at all times. So the first drop, exactly the same again, turns the water blue. And I just want to revert what I said. My tap water that goes in is less than 1 KH. So I'm looking for 2 drops really. First drop's going in. As soon as the first drop goes in, give it a shake. And that's already gone yellow. So I've only got 1 KH in the pond. That is as low as what it can be before you've got no KH in the pond. So that tells me what I need to do now is I need to buffer the pond. And I just want to make it clear, trying to teach someone what their KH should be can be very difficult to try to explain until you've been in the hobby a little bit longer. So the aim of the game is whatever comes out your tap water, that is what water that you need to test to start with. And only ever use the KH buffer if you've got a really soft tap water supply, which your KH coming out your tap is only maybe 1 or 2, or even like mine's just under 1. It's why I need to make sure that I use a KH buffer to make sure that I can boost that KH up, so then it keeps the pH stable and the fish live a lot better, happier life. Like I said a minute ago, I will add this in a second. I'm gonna stand up, but I want to just make it dead clear, because KH in a pond, it can be so confusing knowing what it should be, what you're at, and if you're trying to chase numbers that you will never be able to get. So for instance, a pure example is if you live in a hard water area and your KH, what comes out your tap water supply, is 7 or 8, or sometimes even higher than that. Some people have a KH of 10, some people have a KH of 15. Those type of water systems, what's running into your pond by your tap water supply, you will never ever reach a KH of 1 or 2 like mine, because it's what you feed the pond with on a regular basis like mine. I'm constantly lowering the KH by the fresh water going in, but also what lowers KH in a pond is feeding. So how much you feed your fish, that will also play a factor on the whole nitrogen cycle with the KH being stable. So it's a lot of yibbity yabbada, but what I'm getting at is that if you keep it the same, only ever add the KH buffer if it's something that you need to add. Don't add it if your KH is already at 6 or 7 in the pond, because then you don't need no KH. If you've already got a KH of 5 or 6 and it sits stable, then you don't have to worry about your KH, because your KH is fine. If your KH is not anywhere near those numbers and you're like me, you're only at 1 or 2, then to keep your pond a lot happier so you don't get a pH crash, you've got to add some bicarbonate soda. Me, myself personally, I like using the Ntlabs KH buffer. And I've been in the game long enough now to know how to keep my water bang on, but this whole demonstration of this video really is for people out there that don't really know how to keep their water as good as what they can. I basically just add the same amount every other day, and it's just a bit of a routine thing for me. I've got used to knowing what I need to add, how much I need to add, and what time I need to add it. And it will differ during the time of year as well, because if you're feeding less in the winter, then you're not going to be needing as much buffering. You're still going to have to buffer, but you don't need to buffer as often. And if you don't trickle in, then you don't have to buffer as often either. But the advantage of trickle in is that it also plays a part on all of the other tests that you test for, your ammonia, your nitrate, your nitrite. It also helps that. So that's the reason why I trickle in, and it's the reason why I use the KH buffer as well. That being said, that's my KH all in the pond. All I do now is that I take another sample. I'll let that mess around in the pond for about 10 minutes. I'll do another sample just to make sure that I'm at a KH of 2. And I know I can go away for the weekend for a couple of days and it will be fine. There's a lot of people that upgrade from me and they put in like a dosing system or a header tank where you can constantly trickle in that KH to make sure you keep it the same every 2 days. But because I'm here and it's part of the hobby that I do myself, I enjoy doing it, I enjoy maintaining it. I just wanted to share with you guys what I do, but the number one key of it all is what I must stress in this video, is that so many koi keepers don't have a test kit to start with, and so many koi keepers do not even test the water that they're putting into the pond, because different times of the year, and also sometimes depending where your water board is, sometimes that can change whatever they do their end before you get the water through your tap. So it's also a good idea to test the tap water on a regular basis just to see if it's always the same. Sometimes it could be, you know what I mean? It could change, and a lot of people have experienced it where they used to have a low KH and now they've got a high KH. It depends what they do at the water board where you get your water from. I know down in the comment section there's bound to be the Mr. Rights and the Mr. Wrongs and the whats and the whens, but it's down to what works for you. If it works for you, then happy days. I'm only making this video to show you what I do and a little demonstration of how I keep my koi as happy as what I can, because it's what I can do. And I just got to stress that, because in this hobby you don't necessarily have to have a test kit. You don't necessarily have to test your water. I mean, there's koi keepers out there that I speak to on a regular basis, and they tell me that they don't run their water through a dechlorinated system, that they just spray a hose pipe into the pond, or they just never change no water, or they use rainwater. But what you find with those koi keepers is that the koi become stable of what they're used to doing, so they don't get problems and they don't get situations and issues and parasites and problems with their koi. When you first get into this hobby, it's mega confusing, and I'm not gonna lie, it's still confusing for me now, because what I've learned over the years, every year it's sort of changed, because I've learned a little bit more off somebody else who's a lot more experienced than me, because I've put my hands up. There's people out there with a load more knowledge than what I've got, and I'm like a sponge to those people, because the information that they can give me, I will just take it all in, because I'll take a little bit from that, a little bit from that, and a little bit from that, and I'll put it all together and I'll make it work for me, because everybody's pond's different and everyone runs it a different way. But I got to admit, if I didn't have a test kit myself, I would struggle in this hobby, because a test kit for me is the first thing that I go to if I've got any problems with a fish flicking, or if I've got any problems with, you know, when you go out and you're like, something's not quite right, and you do a water test, that's the first thing that I go to before I do anything. Yeah, I'll be interested to know what you guys do, how you guys get on with it, and yeah, just one of them things really. I just wanted to share what I do, and it's a bit of a yibbity yabbada, a bit of a jibbity jabbada. That being said, if I don't see you in a week, I'll see you for a window. But test your chlorine as well, because that is vital. If you've got chlorine going into your pond, that will upset your fish, and it will upset your biological system. And yeah, chlorine's another whole game. Well, to be honest with you, the whole water situation, there's not enough time to talk about it in one video, because even now I'm thinking to myself, have I said everything right how I need to say it? That's me. Like it not. Subscribe to the channel if you want to. Like the video if you want to. That being said, thanks for watching the video. If I don't see you in a week, I'll see you for a window. Bosh.